Hello once again. Today I've got another interesting vintage calculator to show. This is a Texas Instruments Model TI-5005 Mark IIB printing calculator from 1993. This is one of two printing calculators that I got from a thrift store score many months ago, and it's taken me this long to finally get to making videos of these. These have just sat for so long and I moved on to other things and kind of forgot about them for a while. So this is a printing calculator. It's got a roll of paper inside here, and it's got a printer. It's an impact printer that stamps ink onto the page of the appropriate characters, and it just makes a paper log, if you want, of all the calculations you do and their results. This thing is mostly just an ordinary calculator aside for the printer. It's got a couple of features that are normally associated with adding machines, but it's normal to see these features on normal printing calculators too. This is not an adding machine. It does not use adding machine logic. This is an ordinary calculator, but it's a printing calculator. It's pretty well known that Texas Instruments has a very important place in the history of the electronic calculator, but they also have a very important place in the history of printing calculators. In fact, one of the very first handheld battery-powered electronic calculators was called the Canon Pockettronic, and it was based not only around Texas Instruments integrated circuits, but it was based on a thermal printer designed by Texas Instruments. And the Canon Pockettronic actually had no electronic display. The only form of display was by the printer. Texas Instruments did start making their own printing calculators in the mid-1970s, many of which also lacked electronic display, such as the TI-5050. They have no electronic display, just the printer. But of course there were many models that had both a printer and an electronic display, such as this one. So as I said, this is pretty much 90% just an ordinary calculator. We'll take a look at the buttons here. You've got your number keys, the period, equals, you've got your standard four functions. You've got a memory functionality with a combined memory recall and memory clear key. I'm not a fan of a combined recall and clear key. I prefer separate memory recall and memory clear keys, but it's all well and good. We've got a percent function, and then we've got an on and off keys, and then we got some buttons that you normally don't see on anything other than printing calculators. That's a paper feed button. You press that button and the printer feeds the paper. The little pound symbol here, that's the non-add key. Pressing this key essentially prints what's currently on the display onto the paper. It doesn't do any calculations, it doesn't add it to any sort of total, it simply prints what's on the display onto paper, and that's very useful if you want to log things like, for example, serial numbers. You want to print numbers without them being a part of any calculation. P/NP, that turns the printer on and off, print or no print. 5/4 is a rounding key. When it's turned on, numbers whose final decimal place is not shown in the display will round the last shown decimal up to the next higher number if the hidden decimal is 5 or more, or it won't round up if it's 4 or less. If you turn this key off, it always rounds down, regardless of what the hidden digit is. DEC, that's a decimal place selector. You can set it for, normally the normal option is floating point like any calculator, but you can also set it to 0 decimal places if you only want to calculate to the nearest integer, 2, 4, 6 decimal places like that. And GPM, I actually had to look at the manual to see what this was and how to use it. It means gross product margin. It's a feature normally seen on adding machines where you can calculate profit margins or loss margins, stuff like that. Physically, this thing is quite chunky, you can see, because of that printer. It's an ordinary LCD display. And it says TI-5005 Mark II, but this is the Mark IIB model. The original Mark II was exactly the same, but it was a bit, you know, it was older, so it was more squarish. The B model sort of rounded it out, made it a bit more modern looking. If we look over here, it says TI-5005 2B. 4 AA batteries is what this takes. Interesting serial number, quite low. It was made in Taiwan. There's your battery compartment where 4 AA batteries go. On the back, we have a plug for a 6-volt AC-DC adapter, center negative. Make note of that if you have one of these. Most AC adapters are center positive, not this one. It's center negative, so take care if you plug in an adapter that it's center negative. Not that you really need an adapter. This thing, batteries in this thing last a very long time, even despite the extra load of the printer. I haven't had a set of batteries die in this calculator or similar calculators I have yet. So we'll take a look at the printer here. So we lift this cover off, and it's actually a really cool design. I really love this. You not only have a space here to store a small roll of paper, but this thing flips up and you can store a full-size roll of paper here like you'd use in an adding machine. And it just goes like that. So you have your big roll of paper here, and the paper feeds through this slot right here. So you could use one of these for really heavy-duty use. And just have a large roll of paper, you know, for heavy-duty desktop use. You have a big roll of paper, easy to change out, lasts a long time. Or if you want to use this portably, like I obviously do, you can fold it down there and it stores away. Very, very nice design. I like that a lot. I will take the paper roll out. Obviously, the normal full size, the paper that this uses is the same width that's used in an adding machine. It's 2¼ inches or 58 millimeters wide, but the diameter of the roll is a lot smaller, of course, to fit in that space. So rolls of paper that fit in a calculator like this are not as common to find as the full size rolls for adding machines. But all I did was I took a full-size roll meant for an adding machine and I literally just pulled a ton of paper out of it and rolled it up into a tight roll and stuck it in this. And it's lasted me a long time so far. I use this calculator at work. I use it quite a bit, usually once or twice every day. And yeah, I made this roll for it out of a full-size roll of paper about a month ago, and I still have quite a lot left, you can see. So, very good. So, looking at the printer itself here, it is quite interesting. This printer was made by Alps, and this printer mechanism has been used on dozens, if not hundreds, of models of printing calculators in the 80s and 90s and possibly in the 2000s. And it's an impact printer, so it uses ink. So right here is this little rubber track that's wound around this wheel and around this wheel, and it goes around like this, and it's molded with every character that the calculator could print. All the numbers, a period, an M for memory, you know, etc. And it's basically got this single impact head. Think of it like the hammer on a typewriter, but scaled way down. And a motor spins this rubber track, and this print head moves from right to left and stop at the appropriate positions to print a letter. And the motor spins this rubber track, and every time the character on the rubber track that needs to be printed passes in front of the impact head strikes, and it prints that letter onto the paper, or that prints that character onto the paper. But where does the ink come from? Well, right here is a tiny little ink roller, and that ink roller continuously rolls against the rubber track. So the rubber track is pinched between this white plastic wheel and this ink roller right here, and the ink roller is on a bit of a spring. And yeah, it just continuously wets the entire rubber track with the ink. Now when I got this calculator, the ink roller, unsurprisingly, was all dried up. The print was very, very faint. And you can get replacement ink rollers for these pretty cheaply, about $5 a piece online. It's a really standard part, just because this printing mechanism, as I said, was used in so many calculators. And the roller is most commonly identified as a Canon CP12, just because this mechanism was mostly used in Canon printing calculators. So you'll find the roller under Canon CP12. CP12 was Canon's model name for this ink roller. But it goes under so many names, but Canon CP12 will bring it to you, and you can buy generic ones of all sorts of generic brand names on eBay and Amazon and everything else for pretty cheaply. But I did some experimentation to see if there was a way I could re-wet the current ink roller with new ink and make it functional again. And it took me a long time and a lot of failures to try and find something that would work. I tried fountain pen ink, and that would work for like a day or two, and then it would dry up. I tried ordinary marker, and that obviously didn't work. And I gave up and figured I'd just have to buy a new roller. Didn't figure there'd be any type of ink that I could get a hold of that would be proper for re-wetting this roller and wouldn't dry up. But then I did find a solution, and actually one of my co-workers told me about this, because of course at work we use a bunch of adding machines, and as it turns out, at least one of my co-workers knows of this trick to rejuvenate dried up ink rollers. It's stamp pad ink. So, you know, stamp pads where you take a rubber stamp and you stamp it in the ink and then you stamp it on the paper. You can buy bottles of stamp pad ink to re-wet your stamp pad, and as it turns out, it's probably the exact same type of ink that's used on these printing calculator ink rollers, or at the very least, it's the right type of ink that it doesn't dry up or anything. So what I did was, I had a coworker at work whose adding machine's ink roller dried up, and she uses the printer on her adding machine all the time, so she was really missing a functional printer. So I decided to go to the local office supply store, and I bought a little bottle of black stamp pad ink. It was Trodat brand, T-R-O-D-A-T, Trodat brand black stamp pad ink. And I took the roller out of her adding machine and I put 3 or 4 drops of this stamp pad ink, and it works perfect, and is still working perfectly to this day. And I've done it the same to this calculator and another printing calculator I got that I'll be showing in a future video. And it did the trick. So if you need to know how to rejuvenate an ink roller in a printing calculator, it's stamp pad ink. And you can get a bottle of Trodat stamp pad ink in any color you want. It doesn't have to be black. The ink in this calculator was originally purple. That's the color of the ink on this roller, and replacement rollers are also purple. But I just went with black just because, but you could get red, blue, you know, whatever you want. But yeah, that's the trick, and you can get a bottle of that Trodat ink for, I think, 10 or 15 bucks, and it'll last you forever, because you only need 2 or 3 drops to completely rejuvenate a roller, so that's very nice. So to remove the roller, you just bend it back slightly and then pull up on it and prepare to get your fingernails full of ink. But yeah, there it is. You can see it's kind of spongy, and it's soaked with stamp pad ink, and it works excellent. And to put it back in, you just gotta line it up, snaps down. So let me go ahead and demonstrate this calculator. So the first thing I've got to do is refeed the paper through it, because of course we want to demonstrate the printer. So what I'm going to do is, I'm going to pull the paper out and I'm going to feed it under this guide, and I'm going to turn the calculator on. And this particular calculator, when it turns on, it prints a 0 onto the paper, but the paper hasn't been fed yet, so it's just going to stamp it onto the metal paper backing, but that's okay. So now I'm going to hit the feed button, and hopefully the paper is in far enough that it feeds through. Nope, not yet, evidently. Let's see if I can... There we go. Perfect. There. Put the cover back on. And there you go. So here's what the display looks like. Looks like a 10-digit display. And it also has enunciators for all the settings, which is very nice. It's got a print enunciator that turns off when the printer is turned off. It's got an enunciator for the rounding setting. And it's got enunciators for the decimal setting, 0, 2, 3, 4. Oh, and A, I forgot about that. So another sort of adding machine feature that this calculator also has is that you can set it so that it defaults to 2 decimal places, and when you punch in numbers you don't have to press the decimal point to put in the cents. So it's for punching in dollars and cents. And for the A setting, and I forget if that means addition or what, it saves time because you don't have to push the decimal. The last 2 digits are implied to be the 2 decimal places, the cents. So if I put 995, it looks like I've typed 995, but then I press plus, and you could see it prints 9.95 onto the paper. So that's kind of nice. So I'll just set that back to floating point. And yeah, I'll take this cover off, and I'll punch in a random number here and press the non-add key so you can see the printer in action. So yeah, you can see, very interesting, that that impact head moves from position to position, and then at the end a spring snaps it back to the beginning position. And that rubber track with all the characters is always being rolled against the ink roller, so it's always wet with ink. And you can see there, the first time I hit the non-add key, it actually put a little pound sign there to let you know that was a non-add. I hit the clear key, and I'll hit it again. And you can see, like an adding machine, it prints a little star there to mean total. But in the case of this calculator, the star just means clear. So I can punch in a random number. And you see, it's pretty neat, and it's not terribly slow either, but you've got a number multiplied by another number, and that equals that number. And I guess the star just must be printed to help people familiar with adding machines. I mean, this thing's not an adding machine, so it doesn't have the concept of a total beyond, you know, doing a calculation and then having a result. So I guess the star just means, hey, this is the result. But yeah, I mean, there's pretty much not much more to demonstrate than that. Get you a close-up here. And we got an error. When it prints a line of dashes, that means error, and the number below that is a junk number. And you can see we have an error enunciator. Wow, that was cool. So I'm going to clear this, feed the tape. We have a built-in paper tearer thing here, so I will tear off the tape. Demonstrate the memory here, put a number into memory, and you can see It's got a little M plus there. Subtract from memory. And if I clear later, and I think this thing retains the memory after it's been turned off. It does. That's very cool. You don't see that on a lot of battery-powered calculators. Very, very nice, except for scientific calculators. But of course, where this thing could be used for keeping financial records, I guess Texas Instruments wanted to take the extra care to make a memory that's retained while power's off. Presumably, it would be lost if power was completely removed, like if a battery was taken out or the AC adapter unplugged. Memory recall, and then clear. And there it says M plus, M minus. Recalling the memory shows a diamond, which makes sense, and then memory clear shows a star. So I guess for my final demonstration, I'll show how this GPM key works, gross profit margin. So I'll just take the example out of the manual here. Let's say I have an item that costs $60, so I'll punch in 60, and then I'm going to press times. I have an item that costs $60 and I need to know how much to sell it for in order to make a 40% profit. So I put 60 times and I'm going to put 40 and hit GPM. And there you go. A item that costs $60, if I want to resell it at a 40% profit margin, I need to sell it for $100. So there you go. That's how that works. And that is pretty much all there is to show of the Texas Instruments Model TI-5005 Mark IIB printing calculator from 1993. My first printing calculator, or more correctly, one of my first two printing calculators. I now own many, many, many of them when you count the adding machines I've acquired over the past couple of months. But yeah, really neat device, and like I said, I use this a lot at work. The printer is very, very useful. I'm one of those people who will do a calculation and will want to do it like a second time in a row just to make sure I didn't enter anything wrong. But with something like this, I don't need to do that. I have a complete history of what I did right here, and it's very useful for record keeping and stuff like that. I actually have you know, several inch long pieces of paper tape from this calculator pinned up with tape on the wall in my office at work, just because they have records on them I've calculated that I want to keep for future reference. You know, very useful stuff. I never realized how much use I would get out of a printing calculator. But it's a very neat device. And it's certainly a very cool find for like a couple of dollars or something that I bought this for. So there you go. Hope you guys enjoyed this video. Thank you very much for watching, and I will see you next time.